The ranch had been in my family for generations, a wide stretch of rolling fields, oak groves, and a sturdy gate that marked the boundary between my land and the rest of the county road. I always kept the gate locked, not just out of habit, but because that land meant more than property to me. It was heritage, hard work, and the memory of my father and grandfather who built it with their hands. But ever since the new homeowners association had taken root in the development a mile down the road, trouble had been creeping my way. At the center of that trouble was one woman, a self-proclaimed community leader named Karen, who had decided that because the HOA maintained the main road near my property, she had some kind of authority over my ranch. She was the type of woman who strutted around with a clipboard and sunglasses, issuing orders as if the whole world answered to her. At first, I brushed off her nonsense. After all, I lived outside their HOA jurisdiction, and no legal document in the county records gave her power over me. But then, she began driving through my ranch gate, ignoring the private property signs, acting as if my land was a shortcut. I discovered her tracks one morning after feeding the horses, deep tire ruts cut across the pasture, leading straight to the back entrance where she had forced open a latch. I patched the gate, tightened the lock, and thought that would be the end of it. But the next day, the lock was cut clean through. I was furious, not just because of the disrespect, but because my cattle roamed free in that field, and a careless car could spook them or injure them. I went to her cul-de-sac to confront her directly, finding her SUV parked smugly in her driveway. She leaned against the hood, sipping coffee as if waiting for me to show up. "You can't block access to that road," she said before I could even open my mouth, her tone dripping with entitlement. "That path through your gate is the most convenient way for me to reach the highway. Your land is practically part of our community anyway." I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to keep calm. "That's my ranch, not your shortcut. You're trespassing, and if you keep it up, I'll involve the sheriff." She laughed, a sharp, mocking sound that boiled my blood. "The sheriff's on our side. This is about community improvement. Don't be difficult." With that, she flicked her hair and walked back inside as if the conversation were finished. I drove home, seething, knowing this wasn't going to stop. Over the next week, the trespasses got worse. Every time I repaired the gate, she found a way around it. First, she clipped the wire I added. Then she began dragging the gate itself wide open with her SUV, leaving it hanging crooked. I installed a chain with a heavy-duty padlock, only to find it cut with bolt cutters the very next day. It wasn't just the damage, it was the principle, the blatant disrespect for my property rights, and the danger it posed to my livestock. My neighbor, Old Man Harris, shook his head when I told him. "That woman's gonna learn the hard way," he muttered. "These HOA types think they own the world until someone shows them otherwise." I decided then and there that if she wanted to play games, I'd set the rules. I spent the next few days planning carefully because one thing my father taught me was that ranching isn't just about muscle, it's about patience and strategy. I watched her pattern, noting the time she drove through. Usually late afternoon, right after work, when she'd be rushing to get home and shave off a few minutes from her commute. Sometimes she even brought her friends, leading convoys of HOA board members through my property like it was their private lane. That was the last straw. I knew then that a simple lock or warning sign wasn't enough. I needed a trap, not one that would physically harm her, but one that would make her regret ever thinking of crossing onto my ranch again. I went to work with my tractor, digging just off the main dirt path she favored. I set up a false trail, one that looked smooth and freshly graded, enticing her to follow it, while in reality it led to a soft patch I had soaked overnight with irrigation water. Beneath the crusty surface, it was a pit of mud deep enough to swallow tires whole. I camouflaged it carefully, scattering a bit of gravel and straw to make it look like the rest of the road. Then I reinforced my actual gate with steel posts and a hidden locking mechanism that she couldn't see from a distance. From her angle, it would look like I had lazily left it open, the perfect invitation to roll right in. My heart pounded as I worked, equal parts nervous and exhilarated. It wasn't just about protecting my ranch anymore, it was about teaching Karen a lesson in respect. For days, I waited, checking the trap, making sure the mud stayed soft and the disguise held up. Finally, one Thursday evening, I spotted her SUV coming down the county road, her headlights glinting in the setting sun. She didn't even slow down at the gate, just barreled right in like she owned the place. My pulse raced as I watched from a distance, hidden behind the barn. Her tires rolled confidently over the false trail, and for a moment I thought she might hesitate. But true to form, her arrogance blinded her. She pressed the accelerator, and the moment those front wheels hit the mud, the SUV sank with a sickening squelch. She floored it, sending clods of wet earth flying, but the more she pressed, the deeper it buried. Within minutes, her shiny black SUV was stuck up to the axle, tilted at an awkward angle. I could almost hear her shrieking through the glass. My trap had worked perfectly, and as I watched her climb out in her spotless shoes, sinking ankle deep into the muck, I couldn't help but grin. This was just the beginning, because I knew Karen wasn't the type to back down after one humiliation. She'd come back with excuses, threats, maybe even reinforcements. But what she didn't realize was that I was prepared for a long game, and on my land, I always played to win. Karen's shrieking voice carried across the pasture as she tried desperately to flag down passing cars on the county road. But of course, no one stopped. Who in their right mind would wander into another person's ranch at dusk just to entertain the drama of a nosy HOA woman stuck knee-deep in mud? I watched from the shadows of the barn, arms crossed, savoring the sight of her stomping around, her pristine outfit ruined by streaks of clay, her heels sinking with every frustrated step. She pulled out her phone, probably dialing her HOA cronies, and sure enough, within half an hour, another SUV appeared on the horizon, headlights bouncing as it sped down the road and through my gate. This one was driven by a man I recognized from the HOA board, a smug fellow named Carl, who once bragged at a town meeting that he knew people in zoning and could get anything passed. He parked just shy of the mud pit, got out, and stared at Karen's half-submerged vehicle with disbelief before shooting a glare in my general direction, as if he knew I was watching. The two of them spent the next hour trying everything, pushing, rocking the SUV, even tying a tow strap between Carl's truck and Karen's car. The problem for them was that I'd soaked the ground so thoroughly that every tug only made her vehicle sink deeper, until even Carl's truck tires were spinning helplessly in the muck. By the time they finally gave up, both vehicles were stuck, headlights glaring like defeated sentries. That's when I made my move. I strode out from the barn, boots crunching on the gravel, and let the beam of my flashlight catch them by surprise. Karen froze mid-gesture, mud dripping off her fingers, while Carl straightened his back like a kid caught stealing from the cookie jar. "Evenin'," I said calmly, the word rolling off my tongue with deliberate weight. "Seems you've gotten yourselves in a bit of a situation." Karen immediately pointed at me, her voice shrill. "This is your fault. You deliberately sabotaged this road. You, criminal. We're going to sue you for damages." I tilted my hat, letting a smirk slip. "Funny, considering this ain't a road. This is my pasture. You're trespassing plain and simple." Carl tried to play diplomat, stepping forward with a condescending smile. "Now, let's be reasonable here. The HOA has determined this path to be part of the community's access route. It benefits everyone, including you. If you just cooperate, we can make this easier on all of us." I barked a laugh so hard it echoed through the fields. "The HOA doesn't own a damn thing out here. I've got deeds dating back 3 generations that say otherwise. And as for your cars, well, let's just say the mud has a way of teaching folks who belong and who don't." Karen stomped her foot, splattering muck up her legs. "We'll call the sheriff. You can't get away with this." "Go right ahead," I said coolly, pulling out my phone. "In fact, why don't we call him together? I'm sure he'd be real interested to hear how you broke onto private property, cut through my gate lock, and tore up my pasture." Her face went pale at that, and Carl's fake smile vanished. They both knew the law wasn't on their side, no matter how much HOA nonsense they spewed. Eventually, they had no choice but to abandon their vehicles and trudge back to the main road in shame, leaving their precious SUVs behind like stranded carcasses. I watched them disappear into the dark, then headed inside, satisfaction warming my chest. But I also knew this wasn't the end. Karen wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. Sure enough, the very next morning, I found a neatly typed letter shoved under my gate, stamped with the HOA's seal. It was a formal notice claiming I was obstructing a designated accessway and threatening me with legal action unless I removed all barriers within 7 days. I laughed so hard reading it, I nearly spilled my coffee. They were bluffing, hoping their letterhead would scare me into compliance. What they didn't realize was that I had friends in county records and in the sheriff's office who hated HOA bullies just as much as I did. I made a few calls, and by noon I had certified copies of the plat maps and property deeds that clearly outlined my boundaries. The so-called access road was nothing more than my ranch trail, carved by my grandfather's wagon decades before Karen's subdivision even existed. Armed with paperwork, I decided to hit back, not just defensively but offensively. I installed motion-activated cameras along the gate, making sure to catch every intrusion on record. I upgraded the locks, welded steel reinforcements into place, and posted clear, legally sound signage that read, "Private property, trespassers will be prosecuted." Then I set another layer of traps, not dangerous ones, but humiliating ones. A section of the trail was rigged with a cattle guard gap disguised under a thin tarp, harmless to a horse or ranch truck, but jarring enough to rattle the teeth out of any HOA SUV that dared to roll over it. I also set up a sprinkler system tied to motion sensors so that anyone who tried sneaking through would get blasted with icy water like a stray dog. Within days, the traps paid off. My cameras caught Karen returning with another friend, this time in broad daylight, thinking I wouldn't be around. They stopped at the gate, inspected my new locks, then tried to maneuver around through the pasture's edge. The moment they crossed the sensor, the sprinklers erupted, drenching them head to toe. The video was glorious. Two shrieking HOA board members scrambling like wet cats, mascara running, their carefully styled hair plastered to their faces as they ran back to their car. I saved the footage immediately, knowing it might come in handy later. But even with their humiliation growing, they didn't back off. Instead, they escalated. One afternoon, I came home to find a group of HOA members standing in front of my gate with clipboards, taking photos, and muttering about easement rights. Karen spotted me pulling up and marched over, acting as if she had authority. "We filed a petition with the county," she announced smugly. "Soon enough, you'll be forced to give us access. It's only a matter of time." I leaned out my truck window, holding up my own stack of documents. "You mean the same county that certified these deeds yesterday? Hate to break it to you, but your petition doesn't stand a chance." The color drained from her face, but she quickly masked it with indignation. "We'll see about that," she spat, storming off with her posse. I knew then that I wasn't just dealing with a trespasser, I was dealing with a full-on campaign. But what Karen didn't realize was that every step she took only tightened the noose around her own neck. My traps weren't just physical anymore. They were legal, strategic, and psychological. She wanted a war, and I was more than ready to fight it on every front. The next phase of Karen's campaign came faster than I expected, and it proved she wasn't going to back down with just muddy shoes and a soaked blouse. No, she wanted control, and she wanted it badly enough to weaponize every trick her HOA could muster. I woke one morning to the sound of hammering outside, and when I stepped onto the porch, I nearly spit out my coffee. There, right beyond my locked gate, stood Karen and two of her board members erecting what looked like an official HOA signpost declaring the trail community access lane. They had high-visibility vests on like they were county workers, clipboards tucked under their arms, and an air of smug legitimacy plastered across their faces. My blood boiled, but instead of charging out immediately, I grabbed my camera and recorded every second. Documentation was power, and I intended to stack the deck so high against them that no lawyer in the county could wiggle them out of it. After about 20 minutes, I walked over calmly, hands in my pockets, and asked what exactly they thought they were doing. Karen spun, on her heel, chin raised. "We are establishing community rights. The HOA voted unanimously to adopt this road into our network. That makes it public by default. Her words were so absurd I almost laughed in her face, but I kept my cool. This is private land. Voting among yourselves doesn't change county law or the deeds. What you're doing right now is vandalism and attempted theft of property. She scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. You don't understand how communities work. Once the majority agrees, the minority has to comply. That's democracy. I leaned closer, staring her down. This isn't a homeowners association ballot. This is my family's ranch. And if you think democracy means you get to trample on private rights, you're about to get a harsh education. With that, I pulled the signpost right out of the ground, snapped it across my knee, and tossed it onto my side of the fence. Her face turned red as a chili pepper, and she started barking at her friends to write down everything he just did, as if that would magically undo the fact she was on camera trespassing and installing illegal signage. They stormed off eventually, but not before vowing they'd win through legal channels. Sure enough, a week later, I received a thick packet of paperwork in the mail. The HOA had filed an injunction claiming I was obstructing communal access and requested a hearing with the county court. I should have been worried, but instead I felt a surge of confidence. For years, I dealt with bureaucrats, zoning boards, and property disputes. My grandfather taught me that you don't just live on the land, you defend it with every ounce of cunning you can muster. I gathered my evidence, videos of Karen trespassing, photos of the destroyed locks, copies of my deeds, affidavits from neighbors who'd witnessed the HOA sneaking onto my property. By the time the court date rolled around, my case file was thick enough to rival a law textbook. When the hearing began, Karen strutted into the courtroom with her entourage, like it was a red carpet event, heels clicking, sunglasses perched on her head, smirking as if she already won. She gave a passionate speech about community needs and shared resources, painting me as some backward hermit clinging to outdated notions of private ownership. The judge, a stern woman with little patience for theatrics, listened quietly, then turned to me. I calmly laid out my documents, played the videos of Karen cutting locks and stomping through my pastures, and explained in detail how her actions endangered my livestock. I ended with one clear statement. This is not a question of community preference. This is a matter of property rights, and the law is not on their side. The silence in the courtroom was thick, broken only by the judge's gavel as she dismissed the injunction outright. Her words cut like a blade. The HOA has no jurisdiction over this land. Further trespassing will result in criminal charges. Karen's smug mask cracked right there, her jaw tightening as she realized the law had spoken against her. But if I thought that would end it, I underestimated her pettiness. That night, I heard engines rumbling near the back of my property. Grabbing my rifle and flashlight, I rode out on horseback, only to find that Karen and a small group of HOA lackeys had tried cutting through the back fence with bolt cutters. I shouted and they scattered like cockroaches, but the damage was done. The fence line was compromised and 3 of my cattle had already wandered dangerously close to the road. I spent half the night wrangling them back, furious beyond words. This wasn't just an inconvenience anymore, it was a threat to my livelihood. The next morning, I called the sheriff directly, handed over the footage from my cameras, and pressed charges for trespassing and destruction of property. To his credit, the sheriff didn't hesitate. He knew the HOA had been a thorn in the side of half the county already. That afternoon, deputies knocked on Karen's door, and I heard later from neighbors that she stood on her porch screeching about conspiracies while the officers served her a formal warning. Still, Karen being Karen, humiliation only seemed to fuel her determination. If she couldn't beat me in court or scare me with HOA nonsense, she'd try to break me with persistence. More cars showed up at my gate in the following days, some slowing down to glare, others honking or shouting insults as they drove by. One even dumped a bag of trash just outside my fence, as if to make a statement. I knew Karen was orchestrating it all, trying to wear me down. But what she didn't realize was that every petty move only hardened my resolve. I began spending more nights on the porch with a thermos of coffee, shotgun across my lap, waiting and watching. My traps remained active, my cameras kept rolling, and every shred of evidence went into my growing file. Because while she played games of harassment, I was building an airtight case of criminal activity that would bury her once and for all. And deep down, I could tell she was starting to crack. Her face, once smug and confident, now looked pinched with frustration whenever I caught sight of her at town meetings. Her SUV still bore the mud stains from that first trap, a constant reminder she couldn't quite scrub away. The war was far from over, but the tide was shifting, and soon enough, I'd spring a final trap that no amount of HOA bluster could undo. By the time autumn rolled around, the battle between me and Karen had stretched from mere trespassing into a full-scale war of attrition. But unlike her, I wasn't growing weaker with each move. I was growing sharper, angrier, more determined to end it once and for all. The repeated harassment, the broken fences, the phony petitions, and the sneaky nighttime intrusions had piled up into a mountain of evidence, and I was done playing defense. The land was mine, the law was on my side, and yet Karen still prowled around like a wolf who thought persistence alone would grant her the kill. She underestimated the one truth ranchers live by: we don't quit, and we don't let invaders dictate the terms of our survival. One night, after a particularly infuriating incident where I found another HOA sign hammered just outside my property line, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the documents I'd compiled, footage from 6 different cameras showing her car and her accomplices breaking onto my land, the letters she'd shoved into my mailbox threatening community enforcement, and even audio recordings of her berating me in front of neighbors at town meetings. It was a complete dossier of her arrogance, and I knew it was time to spring the final trap. I called the sheriff first, making sure he knew exactly what I planned, and then I spent 2 days preparing the ranch itself. The old gate trap had worked beautifully once, but I wanted something more elaborate this time, something that would catch her red-handed with no chance of denial. Using my tractor, I reshaped a section of the trail into what looked like a newly flattened shortcut, smooth, inviting, and perfectly staged to lure her SUV in. Beneath it, however, I buried a set of cattle grates covered by plywood and dirt, the kind that wouldn't harm a vehicle but would create a bone-jarring drop that would stop her in her tracks. I set floodlights on motion sensors aimed directly at that path and connected them to my cameras for crystal clear footage. On top of that, I parked my ranch truck out of sight with a direct line of view, ready to witness the whole show. The stage was set, and all I had to do was wait. I didn't wait long. That Friday evening, as the sun dipped low, Karen's black SUV rolled down the county road like a shark circling its prey. She slowed at the gate, spotted the lazy way I'd left the decoy path, and without hesitation drove right in. My chest tightened as I gripped my binoculars, watching her tires bounce once, twice, then slam into the hidden grates with a loud metallic thud. The SUV lurched forward, headlights wobbling, before the front tires dropped straight into the narrow bars, trapping them between steel. The floodlights roared to life, bathing the scene in blazing white, and my cameras whirred to capture every humiliating detail. Karen climbed out, red-faced and furious, her phone already in her hand as she dialed furiously. Moments later, another pair of headlights appeared. It was Carl again, her faithful HOA lapdog, arriving to rescue her like some knight in a dented pickup. But he made the same mistake. He followed her instructions, tried to swing his truck around the shortcut, and within seconds his front axle dropped onto the grates too, leaving both vehicles stuck like helpless fish in a barrel. That was my cue. I started the ranch truck, headlights cutting through the dark, and drove straight toward them. The look on Karen's face as I pulled up was priceless, caught like a thief, cornered like a fox, her arrogance crumbling as reality set in. I rolled down my window slowly, savoring the silence, and said in a voice low and steady, "Game's over." She immediately launched into her usual tirade, screaming about rights, access, lawsuits, and conspiracies, her words tumbling over themselves as if sheer volume could erase the fact she was knee-deep in criminal trespassing. Carl tried to smooth things over again, but his nervous glances at the floodlights and cameras told me He knew they were finished. I cut her off with a raised hand. Save it. The sheriff's on his way. Every second of this is on film. Every lock you broke, every fence you cut, every time you dragged your friends through here like you own place, it's all documented. Her eyes darted around, suddenly wide, and for the first time since this feud began, I saw something new flicker in them. Fear. True, genuine fear. She tried to bluster, threatening to sue me for setting dangerous traps, but even she knew the greats weren't dangerous, just inconvenient, humiliating, undeniable proof of her trespassing. Within 20 minutes, the sheriff's cruiser pulled up, lights flashing. He stepped out with a grin. He tried to hide, clearly enjoying the sight of the infamous HOA queen and her sidekick caught, like children stealing apples. He listened to both sides, but the more Karen shouted, the deeper she buried herself. Finally, he turned to her, his tone sharp. You've been warned multiple times. This is private property, and tonight you were caught trespassing with clear intent. You're both under arrest. The color drained from her face, and she sputtered excuses, but it didn't matter. The deputies cuffed her and Carl, reading them their rights as I stood there with my arms crossed, the night air cool against my skin, victory settling in my bones like a long-awaited harvest. Their vehicles were towed out of my pasture the next day, mud-caked and damaged, symbols of their arrogance sinking into the very ground they tried to steal from me. Word spread fast through the county, and within a week, the entire HOA board was scrambling to distance themselves from Karen. Neighbors who once followed her lead now whispered about her downfall, and attendance at HOA meetings dwindled. Without her intimidation, the association's grip weakened, and soon enough, they were forced to disband several of their overreaching community rules under county pressure. As for me, peace returned to the ranch. The gate stood strong, the fences were repaired, and the cattle roamed safe again. I spent more evenings on the porch with a quiet smile, sipping coffee while the crickets chirped, knowing the land was secure not because I locked it down, but because I'd fought tooth and nail to defend it. Karen never dared come near again. After her arrest, fines, and public humiliation, she sold her house in the subdivision and vanished from the county entirely, leaving behind only stories of her arrogance and the lesson she learned the hard way. That some battles aren't won with clipboards, fake authority, or loud voices. On a ranch, respect is earned, not demanded, and those who trespass with entitlement will always find themselves caught in a trap they never saw coming.